Great answer. Thank you very much. The second one is a little bit broader question, which is about the U.S. current defense strategy. So we have now U.S. strategic documents like National Security Strategy and National Defense Strategy reveal that integrated deterrence, which is a big word these days, will be at the center of the U.S. national strategy. Secretary of Defense, Austin, explains that integrated deterrence means all of us giving our all. So can you elaborate on this concept and its the perspective?
Yeah, I think, this is, generates quite a lot of discussion. I like how you framed it from the Secretary's perspective, all of us giving our all. I think that's really important. I think what Secretary Austin and his Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Kahl, have really been attempting to do beyond the Korean Peninsula is integrated defense must be more than just the military. It must be a whole of government integrating all the elements of the national instruments of power, or instruments of national power, to include diplomacy, economic, informational, as well as military. I think that they wanted to try to reduce the U.S. military as the 600-pound gorilla driving everything, and really trying to influence the rest of the U.S. government to step up with appropriate deterrence activities. And so that the first response is not always military. So I think that's one aspect behind integrated deterrence. The second is, I like the way you frame this, because I think one of the key elements of our national security strategy and defense strategy and national security strategy is alliances. That the United States can't do it alone. We are dependent on our alliances, and the mutual support with our alliances really provides strength not only to the United States, but to that alliance structure. I think alliances are really a key element of our national security strategy. And I think we can see that this administration has really taken great effort to improve our alliances, and we see the sustained high-level engagement, not only military but diplomatic, economic, and even working through economic problems, such as the IRA, things like that. But I think that integrated deterrence is really to use all elements of national power to deter threats to the United States and to our friends, partners, and allies, combining with the capabilities of our friends, partners, and allies to deter our adversaries. And then, of course, all of this taking place in the context of strategic competition.
Thank you very much. The third question is about the future North Korea policy, which is very difficult. So with the adoption of the new law on nuclear forces, North Korea officially refused to resume dialogue with Seoul and Washington for denuclearization. So there is a broad skepticism about the ultimate purpose of denuclearization these days. So what could Seoul and Washington do to restart the denuclearization process with North Korea? Or should we focus on strengthening our deterrence capability now?
Well, I think this goes to understanding the nature, objectives, and strategy of the regime. I think that the passage of this law, a large number of policymakers and strategists, I think, are coming to the realization that as long as Kim Jong-un and the Kim family regime remain in power, there will be no denuclearization. I think that it is clear that nuclear weapons are critical to the survival of the regime, as well as to its political warfare and blackmail diplomacy strategy. So I see there is no likelihood that they will give up nuclear weapons. I also think that many people say that first denuclearization and then everything else, with whether it's recognition, opening of trade, and ultimately unification. Well, I think we need to turn that equation around. I think that there will be no denuclearization until there is unification. And this is something that I don't think enough people are thinking enough about. Clearly, the Ministry of Unification here in Korea does, but I don't think we have given this enough thought. And I think that we really need to pursue a free and unified Korea as the solution to the security problems on the peninsula. Now, There are 5 things I think the alliance needs to do. Number 1, the foundation must remain deterrence and defense. We must prevent war, resumption of hostilities, understanding that as long as the Kim family regime is in power, they will conduct provocations. They will try to blackmail, to coerce the South and the alliance and the international community. The second is we need to implement a superior political warfare strategy using all our instruments of power short of war to achieve our objectives. And there are 3 elements of that. First is a human rights upfront approach. Human rights are not only a moral imperative, they are a national security issue. Kim Jong-un must deny human rights in order to remain in power. Furthermore, when we talk about his nuclear weapons and missiles, we reinforce his legitimacy. But when we describe his human rights abuses and crimes against humanity, it undermines his legitimacy. And I recommend to both President Yoon and President Biden, whenever we talk about nuclear weapons, we must talk about human rights. And one of the most important talking points is that the Korean people in the North suffer not from sanctions, not from natural disasters, not from the failed economy, but from the policy decisions that Kim Jong-un makes to prioritize development of nuclear weapons and missile capabilities over the welfare of the Korean people in the North. And one fact that we learned recently is that those 75 missile tests cost some $170 million. That money could be used to feed the people. So, and we should never shy away from human rights up front in the naive hope that by doing so, Kim Jong-un will negotiate in good faith as a responsible member of the international community. We should remember President Reagan when he negotiated with the Soviet Union for nuclear arms control. He never gave up human rights. He said to Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And so we can talk about denuclearization, but we need to have a human rights upfront approach. And South Korea, I am gratified to see, is taking a lead in human rights. The appointment of a special envoy, Lee Shin-hwa, the Ministry of Unification just held a major human rights forum. And so South Korea is really stepping up on human rights. The United States needs to support South Korea in that way. The second is a sophisticated information and influence campaign. And this is what we really need to inform the Korean people in the North about the outside world. I'm heartened to see South Korea removing its prohibition of North Korean broadcast to the South. I have no concern about Koreans in the South being swayed by North Korean propaganda. And I think it's very important that those prohibition be lifted because that gives South Korea the moral high ground to send information into the North. Now, the escapees are sending information into the North. They're trying to do a good job, but we really need to have a sophisticated program. And it's not about insulting Kim Jong-un or making him look bad. There are 4 things that we need to do. Number 1 is massive amounts of information from news to entertainment. Entertainment is very important. Those stories that are told in the North are educational. So massive amounts of information. Knowledge. We need to provide practical information, how to live better lives in North Korea, from agriculture to business, to practical information about how to affect change. So they need knowledge. Third, they need the truth. They need the truth about the outside world. They need the truth about their situation. We don't need to lie to anybody. We don't need any kind of covert action. We need to tell the truth. And then the fourth is understanding. The Korean people in the North must understand the universal human rights that all human beings are entitled to and which they don't have. And then lastly, all of this is about educating the Korean people in the North about unification, how it's going to come about and how it's going to save their lives. And so that really needs to be the essence of a sophisticated information program. The last line of effort is the pursuit of a free and unified Korea. And so, and of course, we want peaceful unification. We should plan for peaceful unification. I say we, South Korea should, and the United States should support. I tend to say we because I always think in terms of the alliance. But planning for unification, for peaceful unification. Peaceful unification is the most complex and difficult. It's the hardest to achieve. And yes, it's the least likely to occur because Kim Jong-un is not going to go quietly in the night. However, peaceful unification, no one can discount. No one can argue with that. And the planning for peaceful unification will have application regardless of what happens, whether there's war, God forbid, whether there's regime collapse, or the outlier is internal change inside North Korea. And if people inside North Korea know that there can be a better life, that how unification could occur, perhaps they will put pressure on the regime and maybe even cause some kind of change, and new leadership emerges inside the North that would seek peaceful unification. So the plans for peaceful unification must be comprehensive, detailed, made public, used as a basis for an influence campaign, and point the way forward for the Koreans in the South and in the North.
Well, there is a decreasing interest about reunification, especially among the young generation. It's very good for you to re-galvanize the desire for reunification.
Yes, I think it's important, and I certainly understand why that is. I mean, Korea, South Korea, but Korea has evolved to such a high level of sophistication. The only country in the world, only OECD nation to go from a major aid recipient to a major donor nation. The success of democracy, of the economic development, of the global culture, the status of Korea in the world is just phenomenal. And so I understand that young Koreans, don't want to lose that. However, I think that it's important to remember that, it is one Korea, unified, has always been unified until 1945. And I remember this story that a Korean admiral told me, that there are two miracles in Korea. The first miracle, of course, we know as the miracle on the Han and the great achievements of South Korea. But I asked him, I said, what is the second miracle? And he said, that is the miracle on the Taedong-gang. The Taedong River in Pyongyang, what miracle is that? He said, the miracle is that after 7 decades, the Korean people in the North still survive. And what he explained to me is that even though there are vast differences now between North and South Korea, at the foundation, they are all Koreans. And if you give Koreans an opportunity, they will thrive as they have in the South. But they've also thrived in the North. After the arduous march of 94 to 96, what saved the Korean families in the North? Markets, market activity. And when the Socialist Workers' Party public distribution system failed, they developed markets. And they show their entrepreneurship and their ability to survive. And if given the opportunity, they will thrive. And as good as South Korea has it, the people here, if there is, God forbid, a war, there will be tremendous hardship here, and the Korean people will survive. And so I think the root of, the heart of Korean culture, the spirit of the Han, I think that's a unifying force. And I think if something happens on the Korean Peninsula, I think all Koreans will come together to solve the Korea question, the unnatural division of the peninsula. It's really ironic that the military leaders in 1953, when they signed the armistice, they put in paragraph 60 that said the Korea question must be solved by political leaders. And I think that is what has to happen. And I think that whatever happens on the Korean Peninsula, the ultimate outcome will be unification. And that will be a great thing for Korea, for the region, and the world.
Well, thank you very much for insightful comments and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really, you asked great questions. And I look forward to great things for Korea.